comes from Software, a developer who recently became known for their creation of the Souls series. Never really got into Souls though, mostly because they have a reputation of being really brutally challenging video games only intended for the most elite gamers. A reputation that seemed really pretentious. As Bloodborne is the spiritual continuation of the Souls series, I was originally uninterested, but a friend convinced me to buy the game and give it a good, honest chance. Peer pressure!
Bloodborne can best be described as an action RPG where you kill a bunch of things, absorb blood echoes, aka souls aka experience, and become stronger in order to kill even tougher bunches of things. However, the game is unique in almost every way. For instance, the player will predominantly be using a trick weapon, named so for their ability to transform between two modes. These modes can be very different from each other. Often one form will attack quickly, while the secondary form will be slower but have more reach. Switching in the middle of combat can create a special move of sorts, which if timed correctly, is an immensely satisfying way of stringing together hits. The trick weapons themselves are also incredibly varied, and often unlike anything you're likely to see in any other game. Apart from standard swords and axes, there's also this thing. Yeah. The player is also given a gun. The gun is used, oddly enough, as a shield. When most enemies attack, there is a brief window for the player to parry them by shooting them in the face. This parry can then be followed up by a pleasurably devastating visceral attack. As the gun can't block incoming damage, the only method for damage prevention is the parry or by dodging. This makes for a refreshingly aggressive game in favor of the offense. Defensive play is either brutally punished or is bogged down by attrition. The biggest learning curve for most battles is figuring out to dodge roll towards a foe, rather than dodging away.
The game wants you interacting with it at all times. It does not want you standing passively in a corner.
This is also evidenced by the amount of healing items throughout the world. Most enemies will drop an abundance of them, and they can be easily purchased. The player can hold 20 at a time, which is more than enough to carry anyone through a stretch of terrain, while simultaneously limited enough to prevent abuse and careless play.
The game is brilliantly designed. Unfortunately, I feel its reputation as a daunting challenge does the game a great disservice. The internet would have us all believe that a newcomer would have trouble with the first enemy, let alone the first boss. And that's just not true.
The game is challenging, yes. However, there is no getting stuck on normal enemies. They're easy. Players more likely to get killed by them out of carelessness more than the game's difficulty. Bosses are generally where the challenge comes from. It's very possible to become stuck on them, but the game gives the player everything they need to survive. There are healthy amounts of checkpoints, useful items, shortcuts, and ways to become stronger. Even if the player does find themselves failing, they'll always be making some sort of progress. Think of blood echoes, which are used to level up a player's character, their weapons, and purchase items. If the player is killed, they will drop all of their blood echoes at the spot of their demise. Usually, the enemy who killed the player will absorb the echoes, forcing the player to enact sweet vengeance to reclaim them. If the player is killed a second time while trying to reclaim these echoes, they'll be eternally lost. However, if they successfully retrieve them, the player will often have twice the blood echoes because they will have killed everything a second time. The game encourages level grinding. If one is to be stuck at a boss, it becomes a necessity to learn the surrounding area and nearby enemies. Through learning, the area becomes easier to quickly run through and gain levels, which may be all that's needed to move forward. Being stuck at a boss also doesn't feel all too frustrating. It gives the player an opportunity to better appreciate the world From Software has built. They are experts at level design. The map itself is full of interconnected passageways and secrets. Every so often the player can find a new, quicker route, or unlock a door granting access to new areas. Every time this happens, it's always exciting as the faster routes make the game easier, but also because they illustrate how carefully thought out the map is. Contrary to most video game world design, every square inch has a purpose. As for the world itself, it's fantastically well realized and dripping in mystery. There isn't much of a story in terms of characters interacting with other characters, but what you do get in its place is the opportunity to discover and unravel the lore of a Lovecraftian-inspired city and the hidden forces plotting in the dark. So much of the game's narrative is vague that it's difficult to be truly certain of anything.
But it's a purposeful and well-crafted vagueness that has the ability to draw the player in and not let go.
It's kind of like this. But in a good way. It's also interesting to see a foreign interpretation of Western cultures. The game is littered with cathedrals and depressing statues formed from a Japanese perspective on Catholicism. It's intellectually fascinating.
The game sounds perfect, but is it really? No. I have a few nitpicks.
It's really easy to become comfortable with a weapon, which is both good and bad. I'm glad I got to use this saw cleaver throughout the entire game, and that many other players can find a weapon to fit their own playstyles as well, but I also never felt any sort of weapon or armor progression. It never truly encourages experimentation in combat, and as such it can get somewhat repetitive. Furthermore, there are randomly generated chalice dungeons which provide a good source of endless content. However, their very nature as randomly stitched together constructs makes them clash with the brilliant level design of the main game. They're okay, but to be okay in a game that's otherwise extraordinary creates a jarring experience. All of these problems are fairly inconsequential and can be ignored, but there is one technical issue of grave concern. The game features an online functionality where players can join another player's world to help or hurt. Hypothetically, a player's world can be set to private and specific friends can join, rather than random internet strangers. Previously mentioned friend and I tried this multiple times with no success. It seemed broken, and as merely attempting to connect cost of value resource, it became anger-inducing.
Well, with great combat, an interesting world to explore, and really refreshing design, it's hard to stay too angry at Bloodborne's faults. It just offers an unparalleled level of satisfying gameplay experiences. I have no problem calling Bloodborne the most well-designed video game to be released this generation of consoles. Or at least so far. I, Andar, approve!